J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy is probably the greatest source of inspiration for most fantasy media, including Dungeons and Dragons. I know the second I watched those animated movies, I wanted to be a part of it. I would write my own fantasy stories as a child, and then a great English teacher in junior high, a huge fan of Tolkien's work, he relit that passion by introducing me to the novels and helped me find the meanings in Tolkien's work. RJ and I met years later in college, and he introduced me to two game systems, West End Star Wars, the role-playing game, and Iron Crown Enterprises Middle-earth role-playing game. One day we should do a review of ICE's game, just for fun, and talk about their insane critical hit charts. If you know, you know. Today we're going to review Free League Publishing's Lord of the Rings role-playing for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, a game I'm very excited to review because RJ and I were fans of their first edition. I'm not sure we should call Adventures in Middle-earth, which was under Cubicle 7, their first edition. Whatever this was, we played Adventures in Middle-earth for many years, and when the game creators and Cubicle 7 decided not to work together to print new books, it broke my heart. In my opinion, this game creates the best variation of the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule system. So is this new edition just as good? Are you curious how it compares to the One Ring 2nd edition? Is it better than MERP? Stay tuned after we roll the credits. Hello everyone, and thank you for watching Really Dicey. This is Manny.
And I'm RJ. But before we go any further, don't forget to take a moment right now to subscribe, because even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
So let's begin by talking a bit more about what this book is and isn't. This is not a source book for the One Ring role-playing game. It's an adaptation of that game to D&D's 5th edition rules.
If you don't have the D&D core rulebooks, you can play this game with only the 5th edition basic rules that are available for free from Wizards of the Coast and elsewhere online. So you can play this game without spending any money with Wizards of the Coast.
Before we talk about what's inside, if you bought the One Ring 2nd edition core rulebook and expect this book to be different in layout and art, you will be terribly disappointed. The interior art and layout are mostly the same, with the same fonts and colors. Even the way information is organized is mostly the same. Really, the two major differences are the rules and the exterior art, the cover, which I have to say is gorgeous, and personally, I like it better than the cover for the One Ring. If you only played or seen the Adventures in Middle-earth series, the previous edition, and wondered if they improved the design, very much so. Information is much more organized and clean, and the art is fantastic.
Yeah, Adventures in Middle-earth, published by Cubicle 7, is very similar to this product, Lord of the Rings Role-Playing, published by Free League. They're both based on the game The One Ring and adapt the rules to D&D 5th edition. But from a rules perspective, I think this version is a great improvement over the previous Adventures in Middle-earth, but we'll get to that.
The first section, the prologue, uses Eriador as the backdrop for the stories of heroes compelled to leave their ordinary lives and embrace the perils of grand adventure.
Yes, and the stories are set in the Third Age as darkness looms with the rise of new threats, as Mordor's flames are rekindled.
The second section, called New Rules, automatically assumes you know the basic rules to the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, but it has some great new mechanics to enhance your 5e play. This chapter starts with explanation of the adventuring phase, which consists of combat, council, and journey. And this phase will take up most of your game session. The fellowship phase is downtime, with greater benefits and storytelling options.
As a group, the players have a pool of fellowship points that represent the bond of mutual trust among the party. And you can spend from this shared pool to gain advantage on a roll, similar to inspiration. Inspiration is still a thing too. Fellowship points are then refreshed during that fellowship phase. The party also selects a patron, which is a person who counsels and provides guidance and information. There are 6 patrons to choose from in this book, and each one has a different mechanical effect for the party, such as increasing the pool of fellowship points or giving new effects to the use of those fellowship points. And that patron's agenda is likely to drive the storyline for the party.
Let's talk about the new skills. The D&D skills are modified a bit. History is renamed old lore. There's a new intelligence skill called Riddle, and the survival skill has been divided into three new wisdom skills: Explore, Hunting, and Travel. Finally, the medicine skill is associated with intelligence instead of wisdom. I like all these changes for this setting.
Another change to the standard rules is the introduction of magical successes. Some character features grant the ability to have magical successes on ability checks, which are different from normal successes. A magical success allows for achieving nearly impossible acts, such as climbing a sheer rock face with no tools. Or when using artisan tools, a magical success can craft an object that may seem magical to others. And finally, there's the changes to the resting rules. Long rests can only happen in a safe and sheltered refuge, so there's no long rests on the road. Short rests happen as usual unless you're on a journey, and on a journey, those short rests will take 8 hours. So this makes journeys a wearying activity where the party really tries to conserve its resources, and it makes arriving at safe havens a happy relief. Because fear, dread, and despair and corruption are strong themes in this setting, there's also a mechanic for shadow. Similar to all Middle-earth role-playing games in the past, heroes may face situations that call for resisting shadow, and shadow points are accumulated and may result in the new conditions miserable or anguished. The fellowship phase gives heroes an opportunity to remove shadow.
Chapter 3, Adventurers, is your race and class section, but here race is replaced with cultures, and there are 6 of them that include Bardings, the Dwarves of Doran's Folk, the Elves of Linden, Hobbits of the Shire, the Men of Bree, and Rangers of the North. And just like in 5th edition D&D, each one has a description, traits, and backgrounds. And there are 6 classes, or callings as they call it here: Captain, Champion, Scholar, Messenger, Treasure Hunter, and Warden.
Yeah, the captain is a fighter leader focused on charisma and strength, similar to a paladin, but without spells. The champion is concentrated on martial ability, similar to the fighter class. The messenger calling is interesting. Their primary stats are dexterity and charisma, and they have some rogue-like abilities and some monk-like abilities, as well as some strong social features. The scholar calling is very versatile, with intelligence and wisdom as their primary stats. They're a buffer slash healer, and they have access to special abilities called crafts, with craft slots. And they can do things like neutralizing a poison or disease, or inscribing a warding rune on a piece of equipment. And then next is the treasure hunter calling. That's the sneaky one. And finally, there's the warden calling, which is similar to the ranger class in D&D, which was, of course, inspired by some character in this setting. In this book, each calling has 2 subpaths as well, similar to subclasses in D&D.
You will immediately notice that there are no options for wizards, clerics, or any of the magical classes. That's because there weren't any in the books. I mean, Gandalf and the other 4 wizards are actually a species called the Maiar, and there's no option to play them. This game stays true to the novels, so be aware that without magic or healing spells or healing potions, this game can be very deadly quickly. Only the Scholar has access to some healing, and even that is limited.
Yeah, now some observations about the equipment in this game. First, the weapons list is a bit different from D&D. There's a short sword, a sword, and a long sword. The short sword is finesse light, the sword is finesse versatile, and the longsword is heavy versatile. Now, there aren't any finesse versatile weapons in D&D's Player's Handbook, and this kind of weapon makes dex-based fighters a bit less difficult to play. In contrast to the Adventures in Middle-earth Edition, there are also no super big shields in this one that grant more AC. Only the standard +2 shield, +2 to AC shield. Also, the highest AC armor in this book is AC 17, but there are ways to build a high AC hero in this game.
Because this setting is not magic heavy like in regular Dungeons and Dragons, Chapter 4, Rewards and Virtues, talk about different ways Middle-earth handles treasure. Instead of a magic sword, you might find one of great quality that can give you pluses to strike, or greater chance for critical hits, or reinforced armor. And virtues allow players to train and customize characters as they level.
Yeah, virtues are similar to feats in the basic rules, but each culture has its own distinct virtues, which is a nice way to make culture a more integral part of how the character is played. For example, dwarves may take a virtue that makes them excel at fighting in dark underground conditions, while elves have access to a virtue that makes them immune to being frightened by undead.
Chapter 5, Adventuring Phases, expands what was first introduced in Chapter 2. The three main parts of the adventuring phase again are councils, journeys, and combat. Some advice from what it may lack when it comes to a variety of monsters and magic, it makes up for it with the amount of drama and political intrigue your player heroes will experience, just like in the books. Many times you will deal with social interactions with councils for either trade, political favor, warning for impending attack, what to do about this ring, and much more. Skill checks and role playing are heavily used here. Failure to find their favor can lead to consequences in the story, and to help entice players, there's a chart to reward experience to those who succeed.
Yeah, rules for significant social interactions are a weak point in 5e. While physical combat is detailed and immersive, verbal combat is left mostly as an exercise for the reader or for the DM. These rules for council provide a much better structure without going to the level of detail that, for example, Burning Wheel's Duel of Wits does. First, there's an introductory stage where a charisma skill check will set the tone for the rest of the conversation. It will provide rerolls on future checks, or it might provide disadvantage if things go poorly. Then the difficulty is determined by the DM or the lore master, who sets the required number of successes that are needed. So for a reasonable request, 1 success is needed, but for an outrageous request, 3 successes are needed. Then the main interaction stage begins. The DC for the checks is determined by the audience's attitude towards the heroes. The results from the introduction affect each role, and effective role playing by the players themselves can gain advantage on these checks. And there are details for using deception, intimidation, performance, persuasion, riddle, and insight checks. The party may achieve success, a partial success where they get some of what they ask, or they might fail entirely. As far as journeys go, the dangers of travel really play a large role in this game. This is generally a travel montage with some key scenes played out. The heroes have to take roles for these journeys. Guides, hunters, lookouts, or scouts are the roles available, and they set their journey path on the player map. The lore master then uses their own special map to determine how long it will take and how dangerous are those areas they're traveling through. Then they make some pathfinding checks, and events occur based on those checks. If things go badly, though, the party might arrive at their destination fatigued, wounded, or afflicted by shadow before they even get to the combat. In Chapter 6, Fellowship Phases, this is the part of the game where players get to pursue their own goals and prepare for the next adventure. So not just shopping, right? In addition to recovering, players can use the Fellowship phase to do their research, study, information gathering as they plan their next move. They can also improve their party's fellowship, identify some magical items, meet their patron, or do any other undertakings.
Most downtime events in other role-playing games aren't as serious, and at times, just a time for players to add up experience points, really. But fellowship phases are very important for the storytelling aspect of your game, for it could be months, maybe years, before your characters meet again. And much has to be discussed and planned what happens in between, because evil in Middle-earth does not have downtime. Chapter 7, The Lore Master, is pretty much your Dungeon Master's guide for the world of Middle-earth. But I wouldn't say it's strictly for lore masters. The purpose of this chapter is to keep everything thematic, or else this would feel like a generic Dungeons & Dragons adventure. There are rules about using Tolkien's setting effectively, including making NPCs and treasures so your game maintains balance. There's probably no greater cursed magic item in the modern era as popular and well known as the One Ring itself. So there are rules about making and using cursed items.
In Chapter 8, The Shadow, there are 21 stat blocks for adversaries such as evil men, orcs, trolls, undead, wolves, and there are even rules for making unique and terrifying nameless things to keep your players on their toes. And finally, the Eye of Mordor is watching and may take notice of the heroes. The Eye's awareness of the heroes grows with every natural one that is rolled, with every shadow point that is gained, or every spell that's cast. This may grow to the climax of a revelation episode, a dramatic and perilous event that may change the fate of the party forever. After the revelation episode, the party returns to its hidden state, if they survived.
For lore masters in this chapter also, there's a section about how to use Shadow to create really interesting tension and similar role-playing scenarios for player heroes. They have a bunch of examples of different internal struggles characters may face that may lead them to darkness, or in game terms, roll save throws, so they don't get these shadow points. If the number of shadow points equals their wisdom score, it may lead their characters going mad or being lost altogether. Corruption is a huge theme in the Lord of the Rings books, and it would be a shame for lore masters who want to give their setting the same feel as the novels to not use it. Chapter 9 is called The World, but in actuality it focuses just on the lands of Eriador. Here you get the highlights of the area, like the Shire and Angmar. You get encounter tables, NPCs, and lots of adventure seeds. The writers do a great job in showcasing the social areas where players may venture to, as well as some horrifying places most people don't venture to. This section gives the lore master enough material for multiple game sessions. And the final section is the appendix. Now, appendixes tend to be the most forgotten parts of the book, of any book, but this section has a great expanded section on lore and quirks of the patrons your company can follow and the benefits you may receive from them. There was also an introductory adventure called The Star of the Mist, so you can see how the game is played, and a section about the use and creation of landmarks you can create for your player hero's journey. This section also has a blank character sheet, journey log, index, and minor items.
So, in conclusion, I've played every Middle-earth role-playing game that has been published. And in fact, I'm sitting here next to a stack of books from the previous version of this game, Adventures in Middle-earth for 5e. My first reaction to this book was an eye roll, like, what, another one? However, this version of the game is a great improvement. We have 4 iterations of this game design now. The One Ring, Adventures in Middle-earth, the One Ring 2nd Edition, and now Lord of the Rings Role-Playing. And each step has improved. In fact, I think the council rules in this version are clearer and smoother than even the One Ring 2nd Edition. But what about all these books from Cubicle 7's game? Am I going to rebuy a bunch of books? Well, I think I have good news for myself, at least. The supplements from Cubicle 7 are pretty much all compatible with this game. They're all 5e. There's some minor adjustments. So, for example, the new version doesn't have the map hex type for Shadowlands. They got rid of that one. And the old version doesn't have the perilous area hexes on maps. And also, remember that the Cubicle 7 books are focused on the Wilderland, while this one is set in Eriador, although a lot of the supplements went all over the place. So they can be used together. So yeah, I would definitely recommend buying this book.
I don't know what else I can add to that except that I totally agree. Adventures in Middle-earth were a great source of fun, and it's good to see these books continue, even under a different name and a different company. I'm hoping Cubicle 7's books will see a reprint one day or an agreement with Free League Publishing, as they are expensive and hard to find now. To this day, I still use the variant 5e rules from the Adventures in Middle-earth games and other Dungeons & Dragons games I run. I give this book my strongest recommendation for anyone playing 5th edition D&D. And if D&D 5e is not your thing, then definitely check out the One Ring 2nd edition. So stay tuned though, as we review the Shire Adventures, the first collection of adventures for Lord of the Rings role-playing, coming up soon.